we are starting a brand new series called Money Monsters and the skills that you need to slay them. And I need to say a couple things before we actually get into the series, because first of all, if a preacher talking about money makes you feel a little squirrely, I totally get that. So I thought I might as well address that right up front, right? I just want to put you at ease. You've got good reasons for that, because you probably had an experience with a church where it was not real positive, or you had an experience with a pastor where they were twisting your arm. None of that happens with this series. We don't do that around here. The point of this series is not for me to try to guilt you into giving money here. You'll see that in a minute. That's not the point at all. I'll explain to you in a second the motive for doing this series. I want something for you. I'm not trying to get anything from you. But before I do that, I thought this was as good a time as any to address something that has nothing to do with the sermon, but it comes up all the time. This is probably the question I get asked more every month than any other question. Somebody, often several somebodies who are newer around here, will say, hey, can you explain something to me? How does the money work around here at Journey? Which I think is their polite way of saying, how do we know you're not slipping it in your pocket? I could be wrong, but I'm wondering if that's what they're thinking. So anyway, my pockets are empty. You're welcome to check them. I don't have any of it. So I thought, you know what? I'll just take this moment here publicly to explain to everybody, because you may not know. And if I get asked that much, probably a lot more of you wonder. And it also is weird because we don't take up an offering. And so that really throws people off, okay? But we want you just, you can give on the app or give if you want to give, but obviously we're not pressuring you. So anyway, here's how money works around here. We actually have a lot of oversight over it. You may not be aware, but our church has a board. They are my bosses, okay? I answer to them. And they have three things they're primarily responsible for, but one of them is overseeing the financials of our church and making sure we're managing everything well, we're using the money to make the biggest impact, we're doing all the things right with money. In addition to that, and those, by the way, those are people who attend here. They're volunteers. They're people who just attend here, okay? Same for another team we have. It's just made up of people who attend here called the stewardship team, and these people they have expertise in the area of finances, so they're also watching our money. And so every month, both these groups are getting all of our financial reports. They're seeing everything. They're checking everything. We don't do anything financially without running it through them, anything significant. So anyway, all of that's happening with those two teams. But in addition to that, we have a third party, which just means that they're not here. We hire somebody. We have a third-party bookkeeper who manages all of our financial transactions here, okay? So they're separate. And we have a third-party CPA who oversees everything going on with the bookkeeper and going on with us and everything that happens with the money. So I tell you all that to say, anytime there's a penny missing, we know about it, all right? It's like, let's track that penny down. So there's so many, there are more, I'm not gonna bore you with them all, but there's so many checks and balances here because we just wanna make sure, one, we're being good stewards of it all, but we're using it all in a way that makes the biggest impact. So you can be confident in that. And if that does not convince you, I'll tell you this, and maybe this will convince you when you think about it for a minute. All the staff that work here, this is not a thing that's obligated. This is not a thing that's mandated by any means, but all the staff that work here, we all give 10% or more of our salaries back to this church. All of us do. And I'm not twisting anybody's arm to do that. We just all do that. And the reason I'm telling you that's not to get a pat on the back. I'm telling you that because if something squirrely was going on with money, do you think we would turn around and give our, we know what's going on with it, and we believe so deeply in what we're doing and that the money here makes such an impact in the lives of people that we all invest here. So you may not think I'm very good at my job, but at least I'm working on a discount. That has to count for something, right? You'll get that in a minute. So anyway, my point is you can just have confidence everything's good. And we're an open book, so if you ever have any questions about money, you can just come ask. We'll show you everything, answer any questions you have. It's not a big deal. All right, that's out of the way. I just wanted to address that because I get asked that so much. Now, back to the series Money Monsters. What's my motive for doing this? Why would we talk about money for 3 weeks? Well, again, I want to tell you why. Not because I want anything from you. That's not where this is going. There's no offering at the end of this today, okay? It's because I want something for you. It's because whether you realize it or not, money has a way of doing something to you. And I know money has a way of doing something to me. And if you're not careful, you won't realize what money is doing to you because money's powerful. It's great. Money's great. There's nothing wrong with money. It's great. But it's incredibly powerful. And money has a pull or current that it naturally wants to take you a certain way. There are some monsters that come along with money, and if you're not careful, they're going to pull your heart, and they're going to pull your life, and they're going to pull your relationships in a certain direction. The easiest way I know to describe it is this. If you've ever stepped into a river with a strong current, you know there's nothing you can do to avoid the current. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's just, you're in the river, you're going to feel the current. That's part of it. So if you don't want to go where the current is taking you, then you have to be intentional about fighting or walking against the current. Well, the same thing's true with money. Money comes with some monsters that have a strong current and pull us in a certain direction. And if you want to go that direction, we're going to talk about this in a minute. If you want to go that direction, that's perfectly fine. But if that's not who you want to be, and that's not where you want your heart to end up, and that's not where you want your relationships to end up, well, you better pay attention and notice where they're taking you. And you got to figure out a plan to intentionally go against the current. And my challenge, I'll just tell you, my challenge over the next few weeks is to help you see that, because it's so normal and it's so natural that none of us realize it. And you know this. You can just be in a river or you can be in the ocean, right? And if you're not paying attention, the current just takes you. You don't even realize you're drifting. Well, that happens to all of us with our money. It's happening here in our American culture, maybe worse than ever before. As Americans, we are setting some records. I don't know if you've heard this or paid attention. This year, we have set some pretty extraordinary records, but none of them are good records. For instance, Americans right now have a record, 1 trillion, this is a big number, 1 trillion with a T, $1,031 billion in credit card debt. We've never topped 1 trillion before now. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you pay any attention to credit cards, you know what the interest rate on those things are. It's exorbitant right now. So that's a group of Americans who have $1 trillion that they're paying that kind of interest on. They're trying to figure out how to pay it back. At the same time, we've also set this record. We have a record $1,770 billion in student loan debt. So you put that together, that's nearly $3 trillion. We can't even wrap our head around how much that is, can we? $3 trillion worth of money that Americans are paying interest on, and we're responsible to pay it all back, which may explain the stat that came out just about 3 months ago. That's a bit shocking. 57% they found, 57% of Americans cannot cover a $1,000 emergency expense from their savings. Now, just put that in perspective. If you're an average audience, and I can tell you're better than average, okay? You're smarter than this. But if you were an average audience, that means, I'm sure it's not you, but that means 6 of the 10 people sitting around you, if their AC or their heat goes out, if they have a major car repair, if they have any unexpected expense that's going to cost them $1,000, they don't have the money to pay for it. They've got to put it on their credit card, which then explains why we have so much credit card debt. All of this is connected. And you may be sitting there if you're in these shoes. This is tough. If you're here, it means you're living paycheck to paycheck. You're just trying to get by. You're under constant financial pressure. And the problem with financial pressure, and you know this, the problem with financial pressure is it never stays isolated to your bank account, does it? Your money problems don't just sit in your bank account. They leak out and they show up in all your relationships with the people you care about most. And they show up in work and the way you show up at work and how well you can work. It shows up everywhere in your life. Anxiety, stress, worry, on and on. So if you're living here, this is having an impact on all of your life, which is why we want to talk about it for the next few weeks. It's why, we've talked about so much over the history of our church, and in the last 18 months since we moved in here, I haven't talked about this at all, and I should apologize to you, because if you're in the middle of this, there's some things that could help you that I hadn't taken the time to tell you, so we're going to fix that. But if you're in the middle of this, living paycheck to paycheck, you know how tough it is. And I know what you're thinking, because I've been there, okay? I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Matt, the problem is I just need more money. That's it. It's really simple. They just need to pay me more, and if I got paid more, then I would not have this problem. And I totally understand that. But that's kind of like when parents look at you, and they've got 2 kids that they are having a terrible time raising, and they say, you know what our problem is? We just need more kids, and everything will be good. You know that's stupid. Do not add kid 3, 4, 5. It's a train wreck with 2, right? Well, it's the same thing with money. What do those parents need to do? They need to figure out how to raise and manage their 2 kids before they add any more. Well, if you're under financial pressure, you actually need to figure out how to manage the money you have before you get more. And I'm all for you getting more. I hope you all get more. But more actually won't fix the problem if you don't know how to manage the more that you get. So, over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about some money monsters that may be creating some of this tension, some of this problem for you. Now, before I go on, there are others of you here who are going, no, this is not going to be a series for me. This is great. I get to sit back and relax. I hope he helps all those people under financial pressure, but you're not one of them. Because you've done a really good job, making money and saving money and investing money, and you made good decisions, and you got it all going on. So you don't have that kind of financial pressure. So you're thinking, okay, this isn't for me. No. These money monsters show up in your life and my life, just like they do in the lives of people who are struggling financially. I'll just say it this way. Possessing wealth doesn't make you good at managing it. You say, I'm really good at managing it. Let me show you. No, I don't mean like that. I mean, possessing wealth doesn't make you good at managing it the way, if you're a Jesus follower, he says to manage it. And he's got a little bit of a different perspective on this. So here's where I'm going with this series. This is going to apply to all of us, no matter which end of the spectrum we're on or if we're somewhere in the middle. This is going to apply to all of us. And I'm just going to tell you up front, there are no hidden motives. I'm going to tell you up front what I hope to help us all understand and learn over the next 3 weeks. That being good with money isn't just about knowing what to do with your money. It's also knowing what your money is doing to you. Because listen, I don't care how much or how little you have. Your money is doing something to you. And if you don't know it's doing anything to you, then it just means you're letting the current of your money pull you in the direction that these monsters want to take you. But money does something to all of us. Now, what's interesting to me, it's fascinating actually to me, is that this is not a new problem. Now, I think we would all admit, no matter if you're struggling financially or not, we would all admit we're probably the most blessed, most fortunate group of people in the history of the world. Because here in America, we're living better today than any generation before us. I mean, our standard of living and what we get to enjoy, it's remarkable compared to other people throughout history. But here's the funny thing. If you go all the way back to the first century, they had far less than we have, right? Their standard of living wasn't anywhere close to us. But they were dealing with the same money monsters, and they were facing the same pressure, and they were feeling the same pull, the same current that we do. The amount of money changes, but the pull of money doesn't change at all. So the Apostle Paul, and if you're not familiar with Paul, he wrote a good chunk of our New Testament. Paul was a guy who spent the majority of his life going around to all kinds of different towns throughout the Mediterranean Rim, telling people about the message of Jesus. And Paul had a friend, a young protege, if you will. His name was Timothy. And he had left Timothy to pastor probably not just one, but actually a group of churches that were in port cities all around, including the city of Ephesus, okay? And the reason this context is important is because these port cities in the first century, they were the epicenter of wealth because they were the epicenter of trade. So all the ships would come in, right? And this is where all the goods came and all the trade started to happen. So when you were living in these port cities, well, you could make a lot of money. And a lot of people in these cities were making a lot of money, at least by first century standards. And so what happens as a result of that is when some of these people began following Jesus, now there are people in the church who are not just living day to day, because there were folks in the first century who literally, it was like, give me this day my daily bread. That was their prayer. They were going day to day. But now there are people in the church who aren't, okay? So Paul gives Timothy some advice or instruction on what to tell these people in the church who have a little bit of money. And he calls them rich people, which, by the way, none of us want to be called rich, do we? Or hardly any of us want to be called rich. If you want to make somebody uncomfortable, just call them rich, and you'll see them squirm real quick. But all rich meant back then was they had a little more than they needed. So by those standards, we're all rich, all right? We've got some food in the fridge, we've got some money in the bank, which means we're not living, give me today my daily bread. We have a little more than we need. So Paul gives advice for Timothy to teach those people, and by extension to teach us, what to think about and what to do. And he goes ahead and he gives us the first two. There are 4 different money monsters we're going to look at over this series. Paul addresses the first 2 of them. Now, here's the thing about these money monsters, and then I'll give them to you. They are so hard to see. This is going to be my biggest challenge with you, is helping you to actually see them in your heart, because they camouflage themselves, and they lurk in the shadows. But they're all interconnected. As a matter of fact, the first 2 we're going to look at today, if you think about it like water, they live on the surface of the water. And the one we're going to look at next week is connected to these 2, but it lives a little deeper. And then the one we're going to look at in week 3, it's all connected to these 3, but it's at the root of all of our problems. It's the one that lives down deep inside of all of our hearts. So the 2 that Paul gives us that we're going to look at today are these: pride and an appetite for more. Pride and an appetite for more. And he gives Timothy advice on how to address both of these. Let me show you what he says. Here's what he writes. He says, command those who are rich, there's our word, just have more than you need. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, so don't become proud, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. Now let me unpack these for just a minute so you see the connection. The first one, this idea of I've got some money and so I'm getting arrogant or I'm becoming proud, that one's pretty easy to understand because you've experienced this dynamic before, no matter how little or how much you have. There's something about as your bank account begins to inflate, so does your ego. Have you noticed this? As your bank account starts to inflate, you start thinking, oh, I'm a little better, I'm a little better, I'm a little better. And we shouldn't do this, but we do. We all tend to look to the left and right and compare ourselves. And when I've got a little more than this person or a little more than this person, arrogance starts to creep in. And I measure my value as a person by the value of the things that I have. And so Paul's telling them, you got to be careful. Because as you get, again, money's great, nothing wrong with money, but as you get more and more of it, if you're not careful, you will fall into the trap of becoming arrogant, of becoming proud because of what you have. So he says, tell them not to become arrogant. And then the other thing he says, nor to put their hope in wealth. All right, now, this is connected to this monster, this appetite we have for more. And let me explain how this is the case. What Paul knew, that all of us have experienced, whether we realize it or not, is it is very easy for us to begin to put our hope in what we have and what we can hold. Now, if you're not a follower of Jesus, this is perfectly natural. But for those of us who are followers of Jesus, it's a little contradictory and hypocritical to what we say we believe. We'll say my hope's in God or my trust is in God, but in reality, it's really easy for me to find my safety, security, and sense of self-sufficiency in how much I have. That's how I'm going to measure it. I was thinking about this as I was prepping. When I was in my early 20s, it's just an example of how this works. When I was in my early 20s, my car broke down. And I was working at a church. I won't go into all the details, but I did not have, it was $350 to get fixed. I didn't have $350 to fix it. I didn't have it. And so you know what I did? I prayed, which may seem like the worst decision, like that's not going to fix your car, but I did. I prayed, and God actually provided the $350, and I got my car fixed. A story for another day. Now, when my car breaks down, and I take it to the mechanic, and they say it's $350, you know what I do? I say, would you rather have card or check? That's what I say, and I just pay for it. You know why? Because God's already provided. He provided in time here, but he's provided in advance here. But I can forget real easily that God provided all this in advance over here. And what I'll begin to do, and maybe this will sound familiar, is I'll begin to think, you know what? I just need to make sure I have enough saved up to handle whatever trouble or whatever problem the future may hold. Now, there's nothing irresponsible. Matter of fact, it's very responsible to save up. You ought to do that. But the problem comes if we begin to shift our hope from the provider who gave us all this, and so no matter what trouble or problem comes in the future, God will provide, and instead I begin to hope in my provision, what I have. Because then I'm setting a goal line for me of I want to make sure that I have enough to handle any issue that comes my way. The problem with that, and some of you know this, that's an imaginary goal. You can never reach it. You can never attain it. And most of you will not believe me when I say this, but I've talked to people who've had so much money, it was impossible for them to spend it all in their lifetime. And they still felt like they needed more because there was always an imaginary problem on the horizon. But what if this happens? I don't have enough to protect myself if that happens. We're afraid that we might need, this is where you get the appetite for more. An appetite for more is driven because you think it's your responsibility to save and protect and prepare yourself for any supposed trouble or problem in the future. And again, it's responsible to save. But when you're expecting you have to protect yourself from all of it, that is a weight that you cannot carry, which is why you have so much anxiety and worry And it's why you carry this weight with you around money. No matter how good you're doing, you feel like it's not good enough. That is a sign that you have subtly shifted your hope from the provider to the provision, to what you have. That you're depending on you to protect yourself and to provide for you in the future, not your heavenly Father. So, Paul's telling them, okay, these are two traps. These are two monsters. They're going to get you if you're not careful, because this is just where money pulls you. So he tells Timothy to tell all of us, instead, if we want to slay these monsters, we need to have one change of mindset, and then we need to practice two habits. And it's incredibly practical. So let me tell you what he says. He says, instead, I want you to tell them to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment, which sounds like a church cliche, doesn't it? But Paul's going, no. You actually have to change your mindset from you're the owner of everything to you're managing. From it's all on me and I've earned all this and I deserve all this, which you're going, well, I did. To which God would say, well, yeah, but I'm the one who gave you the brain and the skills and I put you in the place where you could. You know, it's like I still provided all of it for you. I gave you what you needed to have that. But as long as we think we're an owner, then I've got to trust me to protect myself and provide for myself for anything that could happen in the future. If I'm a manager, if I believe this is all God's and he's given it to me to manage, well, now I've got to be responsible with it, but I'm not ultimately accountable for it. I'm not accountable in the sense of having to protect myself from all the problems. That's his job. And if there's a problem that comes in the future and I've been smart with what he told me to do with what he gave me, he'll provide for me in the future. So Paul says, why don't you tell them, why don't you remind them, everything they have, God gave them because he wants them to enjoy it. But they got to keep their hope in him, not put their hope in themselves or in their stuff. And then he gives us these two habits. And I'll show you how these two habits connect. He says, all right, so command them, if they're going to have this mindset, here's how you get it. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. First of all, he says, I want you to command them to do good. So what does that have to do with money? Well, everything actually. Because if you are most focused on taking what you have and doing good with it, making an impact with it, you will not fall into the trap of becoming proud and arrogant. That monster will not get you. I'm too focused on doing good to look around to my left and right and think I'm better than somebody. And if I develop a habit of being generous with everything that I have, well, I'm not going to fall into the trap of I want more. That monster of appetites, that monster of more, it's not going to get you. Because you're not sitting there every time you get something going, ooh, what can I do with this for me? How can I get more with this? No, if you're consumed with being generous with people, every time you get it, you're going to think, ooh, how could I make another impact? How could I help somebody else? How could I be generous? These two habits, to do good and to be generous, this is what slays all the monsters. So let me just summarize it for you, okay? Basically, what Paul told Timothy to tell all of us to do is something that you've heard to some extent your entire life. And it's simply this. You should give, save, and then spend. That's all he's saying. Whenever you get money, you should pick a percentage of it, and your first priority should be to give some away and to be generous. Because you know what that does? Every time you're generous, it is a statement to your heart, I am trusting in the provider. I am not trusting in me. Yeah, I got all these things I'm worried about in the future, but you might need that money. No, I'm going to give it away first because I'm trusting God to provide for my future. And then second, I am going to save. And you know why you should save? Well, because when you save, then you don't have to think about working 7 days a week to get more, or to play catch up and pay off all the more that you've already gotten. As long as you're saving, you're not caught up in the trap of upgrading and improving everything. As long as you're saving, you have some time. You don't have to work constantly, which means you can then do good. You can then serve. You can then look for ways to benefit other people. So Paul says, all right, just pick a percentage of your income. Be generous with it. Make that a habit in your life. And then save so you can do good. As long as you've got some set aside, then you won't feel the pressure to work all the time. Take another job, and do another thing, and another thing. And then spend what's left. And you'll be free from this. You'll be free from this. Now, my guess is most of you have heard this before. But knowing it and doing it are two different things. For most of us, our problems with money are not information problems. They're not education problems. They're behavioral problems. And you know why it's so hard to practice this? I mean, you've got great intentions. My guess is you would say, oh, I want to be a generous person. I want to be able to help others. I want to be able to do good. I mean, you got all those intentions. So why don't we do it? Well, because this requires trust and discipline. And those are hard. This is what trips you up. This is what gets in the way of all of us. Because if I'm going to pick a percentage of my income, and the first thing I'm going to do is give it away, that forces me to trust God that if something big happens in the future, He's going to provide. Because what happens, if you've ever tried this, you know, first time you write a check that's big enough it makes you uncomfortable, you know, the feeling you get inside of you, it's like, oh, I don't really want to. First time you make a gift like that, what's running through your head is, but what if I need this? What if I need this? What if something happens, I don't know what's happening? What if I run into a problem I didn't know I was going to have? What if? And you're always going to feel like you need it. But that's a sign that you're trusting you to take care of your future. You're not trusting your Heavenly Father. So when you give an amount that's big enough it makes you a little uncomfortable, well, it requires trust. It requires you to go, I am not trusting my wealth, my provision. I'm trusting the provider. God, I'm trusting that if it happens in the future and there's something bigger than I can handle on my own, that you're going to provide for me because I'm doing what you want me to do with what you've given me. To give, to save, before you spend, that requires discipline as well. The discipline to say no to you so you can say yes to something better in the future. The discipline to say no to you, I'm going to put that back and save it. Oh, I don't want to do that. I'm going to put it back and save it and say no to me now and all those things I want. Because I want to have the margin, I want to have the freedom to be able to do good. I don't want to feel like I have to work all the time, make more money, pick up another job. Well, this is all about trust and discipline. But everything about the money monsters pull you away from that. Pride and an appetite for more are always pulling you along the current in the exact opposite direction. So, here's all I want to encourage you to do this week. Would you pay attention to what's going on in your heart? This is it. I think this is hard enough for all of us. Would you pay attention to what's going on in your heart? You say, I think my heart's fine. I don't think money's doing this to me. No, money is doing something to you. It does something to all of us. Just pay attention and see if money has got you caught in the current where it's pulling you down towards pride or towards an appetite for more. See if money has pulled your hope in a direction where you're hoping and trusting in your stuff and your plans and your investments and you're this, you're that, instead of in the God who provided all of it for you to begin with. Would you just pay attention to where money's pulling your heart and the impact money's having on your relationships and on your ability to be the person that you intend and want to be, a generous person, a person who does good for others, a person who makes a difference with your life? Just pay attention. And if you find that money's pulling you in a direction you actually don't want to end up, and it's shaping your character in a way that you actually don't want to shape it, it's impacting your heart and your relationships in a way that you don't want to impact it, then maybe you should do something about it. You're going to have to be intentional to go upstream. Maybe you should decide, as scary as it is, okay, maybe I should give and save and then spend. Maybe I should try a different approach. Because these are the skills that slay the money monsters of pride and more. Here's the thing I know. Being good with money is not just about knowing what to do with your money. If you don't know what to do with your money, you can figure that out. There are people who can help you, podcasts, books. I mean, you can figure that out. Being good with money requires you also to know what money is doing to you. So take a little bit of time this week and just pay attention to it. Notice what's going on in your heart. Notice the direction it might be taking you. Notice the decisions that it's causing you to make. And just ask yourself, is this the direction I want to go? Is this the person I want to be? Or are there some monsters that need to be slayed in you, and some monsters that need to be slayed in me. Let me pray for us. Father, this one is difficult. It's difficult because, it's just so natural to let money pull us in a direction, and everything in our culture pulls us that way. It's just normal. This is how everybody lives. The appetite for more just seems like it's part of who we are and how we live. But it's clearly not taking us to a place we want to be. And so, whether we're on the end where we're living paycheck to paycheck and we don't even have $1,000 to help cover an emergency expense, or we're living on the end where we got more money than we ever dreamed, but we still feel like it's not enough because there are imaginary fears out there in the future that could happen to us, or whether we're somewhere in between. Help us this week to have the wisdom to see where money is taking us, where it's pulling us, what it's doing to our heart and our relationships, and just enough honesty to evaluate whether that's actually who we want to be and where we want to go. It's in your name we pray. Amen.